Friday here on the Northshore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter is going to be joined by Brian Batko. We'll also have Andrew Destin talking Buccos. But for Brian, what's going on with Cam Heyward's contract situation? Does he want an extension, and will he turn into a holdout? We know he'll miss OTAs. We'll also talk about Brian's new story on Najee Harris and what he's doing in a contract year. Lots of contract talk with the Steelers and updates on the Buccos as Paul Skenes is getting ready to take the mound again. It's going to be a fun episode. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Brian Batko, one of our great Steelers beat writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Go to post-gazette.com for all of our written work. Check out our podcasting channel on your favorite podcasting app by searching Post-Gazette Sports. Also on YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers, as well as the Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast. And as always, this show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, they have over 500 different beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap, and they're always switching new ones in and out. It's the best bar in Pittsburgh. More on them later. Brian, we got a lot of contract talk in this episode, and Cam Heyward's at the top of the list. It's been interesting to see over the years guys who have been in contract situations, Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt, Deontay Johnson, Minkah Fitzpatrick. But now Cam Heyward, he's the first guy to be like 35 and say he wants an extension here. What's your first readout of how this whole thing has come about?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the inherent thorniness of the situation, I guess, Chris, is that, we've all in the media kind of made and teammates and coaches as well sort of make jokes about Cam's age and some gray in the beard and how he's been around forever. The guys that he played with, Troy Polamalu, Hines Ward, Casey Hampton, whatnot. But he always kind of takes exception to that. And I wonder if part of that is, just it's ingrained in him that he thinks he can still keep going for a long time. And he doesn't want to be told that, yeah, you were drafted way back in 2011. Not too many guys still kicking it from that class in the NFL. He doesn't want to be told that, yeah, we're just going to have to kind of, put you out to pasture and you'll have to take a hometown discount if you want to stick around as we move along to the next generation of D linemen. And, even if it makes sense on paper for the Steelers to say, all right, Cam, you got this huge deal back in 2020. The writing's on the wall now that it's kind of coming to an end for you, and hopefully everybody can just finish this up and it'll go smoothly. I'm sure Cam is looking at the other D linemen in the league and he's probably thinking, look, like Javon Hargrave, I know he's a little younger than me, but like I raised Javon Hargrave. Like,
yep.
I can still play at that level or better. I mean, when he was here, I was the guy. Or Grady Jarrett, he's closer to my age, but he hasn't been as productive as me for winning teams. So that's always the player side of this. And then there's the team side, the franchise side of just, trying to do the smart thing and not paying for past performance. So that's always where the rubber meets the road in these contract negotiations, as Cam bluntly put it on his own podcast Thursday. The team wants to try to project out and get their money's worth. The player wants to be rewarded for what he's already done. And thus, the fulcrum of every negotiation between front office and player's agent.
Certainly. And I think that's definitely part of this right now is Cam Heyward, whereas, yes, he has had the past success with the Steelers and he's been a Mr. Steeler. He's been on and off the field great for the Steelers franchise. He's been a leader for the team. But also, I think part of Cam Heyward's point is that, hey, I'm not done. I'm not a person to put out the pasture. But he's in the position where he's coming off a year where he had a lingering injury that kept him from being one of the best players on the team. He only had 2 sacks last year, and I think part of the question, Brian, is being 35 years old and coming off of that injury. Can he get back to even if he's not back all the way to getting back-to-back double-digit sack seasons like he did in 2022 and 2021? If he could get them 6, 7, 8 sacks from the interior and be a prime run stuffer, I think that's worth a lot.
It is. I just worry that he's still going to be able to do it at this age and coming off a season that, and here's where some of the narratives I think are bunk when it comes to Cam. The stuff about the guy can't stay healthy. That was 1 year. That was one year last year that he labored through a lot. He tried to gut it out for the team week 1 because they were getting boat raced by the Niners. I don't knock him for that. I commend him for that. But, durability stuff aside, because he had been durable since 2016, other than last season, you do now have to combine that with the age, the rising price of doing business with him. Because that's the other, it's inextricable from these talks is guys don't want to take pay cuts. Guys want to make more. They want raises from where they were earlier in their career. You're looking at it from a player or players union perspective. League cap's going up. My team's got more money they can spend. Why am I going to take less? So that's why these things do get tricky. And I think it'd be a more conservative approach by the Steelers to probably step back and say, it's almost like the Patrick Peterson stuff to a lesser degree. Obviously Pat P was only here for 1 year. Cam's been here for 13. So it's different, but they weren't willing to pay after what they'd seen from him last season. They're clearly worried that he's falling off a cliff at the corner position now in his 30s. I think it's easier to play into your mid to late 30s as a D lineman because it's just not as much full on sprinting and, not as much quick twitch that you got to use like a Patrick Peterson would. But we all know how Cam plays the game. That's the double-edged sword for him. He busts his butt and plays as hard as any D lineman you're going to find, chasing the ball and pursuing, running backs once it gets to the second level. That's what, and that's, I feel like something that also needs to be a caveat to this whole discussion, wherever you come down on whether the Steelers should give him a new deal, how much he should make. Cam is sort of a perpetually overlooked and underrated Steeler.
Agreed.
It's one thing to be underappreciated by the league at large. It's another to be underappreciated by your own fan base and city, which I think he is at times. I think it's kind of a shame you don't see more number 97 jerseys lining the crowd at Acrisure Stadium, and that you never have. So I think he's always got kind of that chip on his shoulder. But in this case, the Steelers need to do what's best for the Steelers. And obviously, as Cam said on his show on the heels of the ESPN report Wednesday night, he needs to do what's best for him. And he thinks right now that's not showing up to voluntary OTAs, which he clearly does view as some sort of statement because he's always wanted to be there in the past and has always made it a point to be there in the past, being a leader for this team.
Certainly, that's where I think that everything's going to be interesting. And he's always been to OTAs, but I feel like, this year with the injury, concerns from last year and his age, I feel like the Steelers, they can afford him to just skip OTAs. They kind of need to see, does Keanu Benton take a step up from last year? They need to get a closer look at Marvin Leal. Not that we're going to know that by OTAs because they're not hitting anybody, but still, I feel like if there's a list of 5 guys on the team that if they don't show up to OTAs, it's, they're not going to miss out on anything. Cam Heyward's right on that list, but it certainly is a concern. You were comparing him to, other players like Patrick Peterson. What I think one of the things that actually kind of hurts Cam Heyward is the comparison to one of his peers at his own position, Fletcher Cox, who's 34 years old. He just retired. Had he not retired, he would have been a $10 million defensive tackle this year, which he could have said like, hey, Fletcher Cox to the Eagles, me to y'all. And now that comparison is gone. And when you look at, the other guys that are comparable in age to Cam Heyward, they're not getting the kind of money that Cam Heyward's currently scheduled to get. Like, he's supposed to be a $22 plus $1 million cap hit for the Steelers. I think he's going to get $16 million, over the year. Here's my question to you, Brian. If the Steelers were to reach an extension, what's kind of like the average rate do you think that Cam Heyward, if they were to meet in a middle ground, what would that even look like?
That's the multi-million-dollar question. And I will say, from listening to Cam's own very brief comments on it on his Not Just Football show, he sounded confident that it's going to get worked out and then it's going to get done. Maybe this is a situation where you're going to buy something you're going to scalp a ticket and you're willing to pay 30 for it, but you tell the dude, hey, I'm only giving you 10. So and he's saying, no, I want 50. So you kind of start low. So you hope to get to what you're actually aiming for. But I mean, that's what I want. Like Omar Khan, I'm sure is going to come to him with the comparables of, look at these guys, Cam, look at these guys and what they're making. Yeah. Look at their production last season compared to yours, albeit not healthy. But that's kind of a moot point because that's a concern just as much as it's a defense for Cam. And look at their age. Look at how young they are and how much less tread is off their tires. So I don't know, Chris. I mean, maybe the $10 to $12 million range I think would be a logical thing for the team. But again, like I said, players don't like to make less than they've made earlier in their careers. I mean, that's just kind of natural in inflation too. And these are prideful people for the most part. We know Cam has always been one to speak up, speak his mind, whether it's with a tweet or in interviews about not just himself, but when he feels the team's being disrespected or his head coach or teammates. So, I mean, he is a guy that he's got a lot of pride, and, I've never taken him to be a guy with much ego, but I think there's a difference between ego and pride. And he's somebody who knows what he's been worth to this team. And, a lot of important people with the organization have told him what he's worth to this team, but everybody's got a price. And there's going to have to be some give and take and some compromise to make this thing happen.
Absolutely. We're talking about contract situations for Cam Heyward and his extension, but one of the major contract situations also is Najee Harris, whose fifth-year extension was denied. And we've talked about that, but Brian wrote a great story about what Najee Harris has been working on. I want to talk to him about what he's learned from talking to Najee Harris's trainer, what we've seen from how Najee Harris is approaching this, and all the angles part of that. We'll get to more of that here on the Northshore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko, stick with us. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, you'll see they have over 20 televisions, so you can catch whatever game you want. They have outdoor seating, and they're the perfect place to go before, during, or after a Pirates game, or if you're just going for a night out of the town and want to experience the amazing North Shore of Pittsburgh. It's a great place to be. They have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap. And with all of that, they still have amazing food like steak on a stone, where you get your choice cut of steak brought to you on a heated stone. Every time you cut off a piece, you can press it into that stone and choose how well done you want every single bite. It's the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. Go to Mike's Beer Bar today. When you get there, tell them Chris sent you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, let's switch over to Najee Harris here. You wrote a very interesting story about the work that Najee Harris is putting in right now. He's changing his diet. He's losing some weight, and what the goal is here. Can you give us sort of the fans a preview of kind of what you've put into this story and what you've gleaned about Najee Harris's process?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people who follow the Steelers closely have maybe seen some of these photos of Najee being back at the facility, or even from his own personal social media accounts of, running a youth camp, I think, in Cancun, and just everything he's been doing this offseason. And the guy looks trimmer. I mean, he looks more slim than we've seen him, both in the face and maybe sort of the upper body as well. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to doubt that he still has some of the most powerful quads in the game, right up there with, your AJ Dillons and guys like that. But I mean, seeing that, knowing that Najee's kind of prefers to be off the grid all the time, but especially this time of year, we know he doesn't always want to talk to us reporter types. So, I mean, I just got in touch with the guy he's been working with in the Houston area, Josh Scott, and Josh was kind of a fountain of information in terms of, not just Najee's mentality, that maybe he was caught a little off guard by the fifth-year option being declined, but also understanding, hey, this could work out better for me in the long run. But also, factually, just kind of the stuff that he's been doing differently this offseason going into a contract year. He said he's been, improving his eating habits, a lot more fish and veggies, no processed foods, obviously working out a ton and trying to increase his speed. And he is leaner. His trainer said he's probably at like 235 right now, but still trying to keep that same power that he's known for, while being more agile, more nimble. And obviously that's been kind of the glaring weakness on his resume, is that not a lot of long runs, not a lot of chunk plays from somebody who wasn't really known as a home run hitter coming into the league.
I feel you on a lot of the points there and I get why he wants to do this. A lot of people talk about he's slow. He's not quick enough to get to the hole. How do you help with that? You get lighter. And also this is a contract year. So if Najee Harris wants to make a big impression, maybe he's got to change some things about himself. But it's interesting that you see him going through that. The Steelers did not re-up him on a 5th-year extension, which means he's currently playing without a future contract past this season. He is the 14th. He has the 14th highest cap hit on the Steelers roster right now, $4.15 million against the cap this year. I think it's going to be interesting to see how and if Najee Harris's work to drop some weight changes how he plays the game, if at all. Like you said, part of what makes Najee Harris really good is his power running style, is his ability to break tackles, make guys, shake guys off and keep plowing forward and keep falling forward. And that's the thing that Mike Tomlin often talks about. But if you lose weight, maybe it takes away from that. And again, we have not seen Najee Harris, I think, play in a fully functioning offense since he came to the NFL. Even when he had Ben Roethlisberger, that was the last year of Ben Roethlisberger, and they did not have a good offensive line. This might be the first time where you could even say that he has a competitive offense around him that can put him in a situation where he doesn't have to sometimes carry the team as he's had in some games in the past few years, or just running into walls of defenders like he has for some years. But I think it's good for him that he's making these adjustments and he wants to do this. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this changes his play style with what Arthur Smith wants him to do in this offense.
And if it will, I mean, hey, maybe it's much ado about nothing. Maybe Najee will, next time we talk to us, say, hey, well, this is typical for me. Maybe I look a little different, but no, I mean, this is just kind of my process. If you remember, Chris, I mean, the last time Najee's body shape was a story, it was a couple summers ago. And
I do remember.
And he's like, you guys are acting like I'm fat as hell. It's like nobody said that. I think one of the stupid NFL aggregator accounts put like a side-by-side photo of him and Jerome Bettis. Jerome, who was, listed at 240.
Yeah.
But we know
listed at 240.
We know he wasn't anywhere near that. So of course the photos look ridiculous side by side, but somebody out there who doesn't know anything from anything was like, oh, Najee's 245. That puts him even heavier than Jerome Bettis when he was with the Steelers. So obviously Najee, did not take kindly to that. If you even want to call it a narrative, it was dumb, whatever it was. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy who, I mean, we know he's motivated. One thing with Najee, I've criticized his play. I've praised his play. I've criticized his leadership and kind of temperament, and I've praised it at times because he is so all over the place. I mean, he is a guy that you never really know what you're going to get when you hear from him in the media. I think he wears his heart on his sleeve a lot of the time when he does talk, and he's been good. But just imagine if he could take a 40-yarder and rip one of those off and take it to the crib. I mean, he'd be one of the best running backs in the NFL, and the Steelers would probably not only be picking up that 5th-year option, they'd be finding a way to keep him here until he's 28 or 29 or 30, right? So that's just not a club that he has in his bag, and maybe he never will. Maybe that's just not part of his physical makeup. That was one of the knocks on him and why some people preferred Travis Etienne in that 2021 draft. So it is interesting to me that maybe there is a concerted effort for him to go. What's the famous example here? The Le'Veon Bell route, right? Of when he dropped however many pounds he did, and the Steelers kind of nudged him in the direction to do that, to put it lightly. And, he was one of the best backs in football. So, I mean, right now it's just such a strange circumstance with the option being declined, because while I get the thinking from the Steelers, it also puts Najee on a list from that first round, his draft year, with guys like Zach Wilson and Trey Lance and Mac Jones and Kadarius Toney, who did not have their options picked up. We know he's been a lot more productive and reliable in the league than those players, and yet nonetheless, he enters his final year under contract.
Absolutely. That's going to be the big talking point for, I think, a lot of people around Najee Harris. They're going to want to see if he can get that production up. And if he does, what happens with this contract? Does he take a deal from the Steelers to stay long term? Do the Steelers offer him a 2-3 year deal? Does he hit free agency and say, I'm going to make every bang for my buck that I can? Because a lot of the experts show that, like, look, analytically, when you're looking at the players that make the most money in the NFL, oftentimes it's because they hit free agency and someone overpaid them for their services. And I think Najee Harris, maybe he wants to get part of that. We'll see how all of that plays out as we continue.
Chris, the last thing I'll say, his speed coach guy said he doesn't think, just from talking to him and being around him, he doesn't think Najee feels slighted. But I mean, I gotta think human nature. You at least feel, if not slighted, at least a little underappreciated, right? That, hey, my team had two choices on the table: either keep me locked in for 2 years or let me walk after one potentially. And they chose the former, or they chose the latter instead of the former. So I do sort of wonder if he's going to want to change the scenery after 2024, because it seems like the Steelers already kind of have one foot out the door, albeit they do have, they will have the inside track to go ahead and bring him back if he blows up this year.
It will be interesting to see how he handles that, and I do think it would be completely natural to if he had a chip on his shoulder. But hey, I think Najee Harris has had a chip on his shoulder, in some years, and I think this just kind of just if anything, it adds a little bit to it. But I think it is encouraging to hear from his trainer that he's not taking it personal and he's looking forward to it next year. And look, if anything, if he blows up this year, it just means that he's going to be making a whole lot more money next year than he would have at the $6.79 million that would have been his fifth year option.
And he can sit back and go, all right, Steelers, go get your 5th round running back, go get your 4th round running back, and see if he can do what I did the last 4 years.
Exactly. We're going to switch it up to the Pirates. We'll do that here in the Northshore Drive podcast. Thank you, Brian, for joining us. We'll be back Monday talking Steelers as we get you ready for OTAs. But Paul Skenes is coming back on the mound. I want to talk to Andrew Destin as he's been on the road covering the Pirates. All that here and more on the Northshore Drive podcast. We're back here on the Northshore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Andrew Destin. We switched to talking about the Pirates. Andrew's in Chicago as the Pirates are on the road taking on the Cubs. They won 5-4 last night. Jared Jones getting his 3rd win of the season after pitching 6 innings and getting a save from David Bednar on the night. But the big thing that everyone's talking about is the game coming up later today, 2:20 p.m. first pitch time on Eastern time. And it's Paul Skenes' second start for the Pirates. Andrew, what have you heard about expectations for what Paul Skenes wants to do after learning what he did in his first start?
Yeah, I would say that he and the Pirates probably would hope to temper them a little bit. That's just inevitable when you're a number 1 overall pick and you've got the stuff that he's got, like a wipeout slider, and you can throw a fastball up to 102, 103 miles an hour. But I would say, what does a good start look like for Paul Skenes? Let's see if he can get through 5 innings. He wasn't able to do so in the MLB debut. The stuff looked great, just candidly speaking here, when he got 7 strikeouts in that MLB debut, but he couldn't get past the 5th inning. He only got through 4 innings, 4+ innings and 85 pitches, I believe it was. So can he be more efficient than a 20-pitch Brennan kind of guy? He's got a big arsenal. He's got a lot at his disposal. But I think something that's interesting about this, and Jared Jones kind of talked about this post-game yesterday, was how this is also coming against the same team. Both Jones and Skenes threw last week against the Cubs. It's pretty rare in MLB where you get to face the same team in consecutive starts, even less so, in this kind of setting where it's 2 rookies. And for Paul Skenes to make both of his first 2 starts against the Cubs, I'm curious if that's good for him, if he gains some familiarity with the lineup, or is that bad for him because the Cubs are very familiar with his repertoire ever seeing him pitch last time. So there's a lot of storylines that I'm very curious to see how they play out, but all told, I would say that a good start for Paul Skenes looks like getting through 5 innings at the very least.
I think that makes a lot of sense with looking at what you want a young pitcher to do and figuring things out. And I think that's where some people forget, like, this guy is literally making his second start in the majors. they want to have this guy around for at least 4 to 5 years before he gets bought out by like the Yankees or the Dodgers, getting to where they expect that to happen. But you want to make sure that he progresses naturally into looking forward. So that makes a lot of sense to kind of, like you say, temper expectations, kind of be like, hey, everybody, let's just naturally watch this thing grow here. Because if you try to do things too fast or you try to put too much on him, then you can mess up the development process.
Right. And it's inevitable to have high expectations because let's look
Right.
at who we're dealing with here. I mean, this stuff has shown at this MLB level that it plays, and you can extrapolate that to Jared Jones too, that these guys have demonstrated that they have, there's a reason these guys were top prospects, I guess is what I'm getting at. Like, they both can throw triple digits. They both have great sliders. Like, there's a reason these guys have been as hyped as they have been. Now, with Skenes, it's a little bit different because he had, he has a little bit of an innings limit. He's being built up a little bit more slowly. He only made 12 starts in the minors before he got called up. So it's a much smaller sample size that he's working with versus Jared Jones, who was drafted out of high school and got a few years in the minors under his belt. Did Paul Skenes totally dominate the competition when he was in the minors? Yes, but it wasn't like he hung down there for a while, really was able to fully develop as a pitcher. He's still learning on the fly the same way that Jared Jones is learning on the fly, and that's part of what makes this so interesting, but also why, again, you want to temper those expectations a little bit because this is not a finished product by any means, which is both exciting and, the inverse.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to switch off Paul Skenes for just a little bit here. I want to talk about the Pirates themselves. They're able to get that win over the Cubs. What have you seen from Jared Jones that is contended to make him? There's some that are arguing that Jared Jones right now might be a better pitcher than Paul Skenes because of that experience that you were talking about.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And I think a second component there is let's look at his two pitches, right? I mean, Jared Jones, I will admit myself as guilty. I was somebody who was hesitant to say that Jared Jones will be a great MLB pitcher, at least out of the gate, because he's so reliant on two pitches, and the changeup and the curveball were still kind of coming along. Those two pitches are still coming along, but the fastball and the slider are so good that it doesn't really matter. He's one of those rare cases, kind of like a Spencer Strider for the Atlanta Braves, where you're a two-pitch guy, and that's more than enough. I bring that up because let's look at this most recent start, Thursday night against the Cubs. His fastball, he did not produce a single whiff with. That's the first time he's done that in MLB starts. He got 14 whiffs with his slider, and all 7 of his strikeouts came swinging on the slider. You go to his previous start against the Cubs, he didn't have his slider. He said he lost confidence in it. He only had the fastball to work with. So even if he's only a one-pitch guy, he can still get you a quality start. And the reasoning behind that is those two pitches, if you overlay them back-to-back, I know Rob Friedman on Twitter is really good at this, the two pitches look identical to a hitter until the very last second where the slider drops off and bottoms out and the fastball keeps going. Oh, and by the way, they're both coming at you at 90-plus miles an hour. The fastball near triple digits, the slider in the low 90s, high 80s. So those two pitches, it's really simple to say. They are excellent, and that's why this is working. And even if one of them isn't there, like yesterday, like last week with the fastball, yesterday with the slider, he can still be really effective. And when they're both on, that's when you see him be nearly unhittable, like the one hitter that he had earlier this season.
Yeah, we certainly have seen Jared Jones sit down quite a few people this year. I want to talk to you about the bats as well. The Pirates are now 3-3 in their last 6 games, and in 4 of those games, they've been able to score at least four runs. Are you seeing any improvement here, or is this just kind of like what happens with bad to mid teams that aren't doing well with their lineup?
I think there's a little bit of a difference. I would say that there's a more intentionality, or they're more cognizant about how they can produce offense, and that it isn't just swinging for the fences. Perfect example would be yesterday's game, right? Yasmani Grandal had a sacrifice fly, another run that they got to come around, and it started because you have Michael A. Taylor with a leadoff double, and then Nick Gonzalez hits him over to third with a fly ball to right field. Like, that's situational baseball, but then they also got a couple of big blasts. One point that I will make is that let's pump the brakes a little bit on the offense, just in the sense of, it's back or it's really being productive.
Right.
But I do think it's worth noting that this team has been better than people give it credit for against left-handed pitchers. They went into yesterday's game with the 5th most runs in MLB, or 5th most home runs in MLB against left-handed pitchers. They hit 2 more last night against Justin Steele. Like, Edward Olivares has been really good against lefties. Connor Joe, there's a reason that people are clamoring for him to be in the lineup every single night, and that's because he's hit lefties so well. guys like McCutchen, Reynolds, when Brian Hayes is in the lineup. Across the board, this lineup does a really good job against left-handed pitchers. Now, obviously, you would like that to translate against righties as well, but I think yesterday was a byproduct of, they have Justin Steele's number right now. They have lefties' numbers, and that's certainly helping the club. In terms of approach, it doesn't look entirely different to me. There's some guys who are certainly still scuffling, but I think it's a good sign to see for the Pirates if you're seeing the results like last night's.
Certainly, they won't get the help with Hendricks on the mound against Skenes. He's a righty, but after him is Imanaga. He's a lefty, and that's up against Bailey Falter. That'll be another 2:20 first pitch Eastern time on Saturday for how this series plays out. Andrew, give us your prediction of how the Pirates finish out this road trip here against the Cubs. They've already won one game. They got 3 more against them. They went 1-2 against the Brewers. And then when they get back, they get to play the Giants. What's your outlook on how they handle this 4-game series?
Yeah, I looked at it as a split. I think yesterday was the game that I was, really curious about, because if the Pirates had dropped that, then they would really be in trouble for this series. But I look at it as they are very much in contention. I mean, this Friday is setting up really well for them. It's Skenes against Kyle Hendricks. Hendricks has had a really tough start to the season. Skenes, we know what he's all about. This is a game for the Pirates that if you're, doing the old Steelers 17-game schedule, wins and losses, mapping out who wins, who doesn't, you look at this one with the Pirates and you'd say, okay, this is a game that you should probably win. Meanwhile, the weekend games, Saturday and Sunday, I don't know if you're nearly as confident. So I say this is a split. But I look at today's start with Skenes on the mound. This is one that you probably hope to win, and if not, you know that you got to steal a game. And maybe that's on Sunday with Mitch Keller starting, just given how well he's pitched recently.
Keller versus Tyon on Sunday. That's certainly very interesting just for the history of Pirates pitching prospects. But but everyone's going to have their eyes on the TV this afternoon as Paul Skenes takes on Hendricks. It's going to be very interesting to see how they goes. And keeping you up to date with all that will be Andrew Destin, who's in Chicago covering all of it for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette there. Andrew, thanks for joining us here. Shout out also to Brian Batko for joining us and talking Steelers. We're gonna be back on Monday getting you ready for Steelers OTAs and also talking about what the Pirates did with their road trip as they come back getting ready to take on the Giants. You can keep track of all of that as well as all of Pittsburgh sports right here with us at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Go to post-gazette.com for all our written work. Find us here on YouTube or on your favorite podcasting apps by searching Post-Gazette Sports. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all the daily content that we produce, as well as the Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast. Back Monday with more things Pittsburgh sports right here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.